I like it. Alright, fine. I suppose, in the immortal words of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, let me count the ways. Back in 2012, I made the ambitious, albeit ill-informed decision to officially rebrand myself as an internet reviewer. And it took a decade of self-flagellation and comment section pretentiousness for me to realize that any attempt to quantifiably evaluate a work of art, something which by definition is unquantifiable, is, always has been, and always will be an intellectually fruitless venture. You know, in case the near extinction of the whole satirical critic archetype wasn't evidence enough for you. Like it or not, there's no such thing as an objectively good movie, or bad video game, or mediocre comic, or what have you. Any piece of media, regardless of the actual level of effort exerted into its creation, will inevitably find its audience and validation somewhere. It all comes down to personal preference and the ways we tend to instinctively grasp at any and all conceptual straws in order to validate those preferences. Chalk it up to confirmation bias or eliminative materialism at your own discretion. That's just the way we've been hardwired for the past 100,000 years or so. If you don't like that, take it up with your local anthropologist. Now, all that being said, as far as my personal preferences are concerned, Pokémon Legends Arceus, yes, I will be using the Japanese pronunciation, thank you very much, is one of the most structurally divergent and more structurally stable mainline Pokémon titles to be released onto the Nintendo Switch, and my personal favorite 3D entry in the series to date. Fun fact, this game was actually announced the day before my black and white video was set to be released, so I ended up going back to the editing timeline and alluding to it while describing my ideal Pokémon experience. And while the finished product may not necessarily check every single box I listed, Legends Arceus is most assuredly an alpha-sized step in the right direction, at least as far as I personally am concerned. And evidently, I am not alone in this sentiment, as even the pan-galactic princess of pansexual pandemonium themselves has gone on record as to say,
Pokémon Legends Arceus is the best Pokémon game. Like, that's what it is. It is, very easily, the best Pokémon game. I will not be hearing counter-arguments. I will not perceive your contradictions. It is compelling, it is fun, it respects me as a finite human being. And on top of all that, there's only one version of it. None of this red, blue, XY, black, white, sun, moon, sword, shield, Bill and Ben the flower pot men. That grift, and it is a grift, is nowhere to be seen here. Pokémon Legends Arceus is the best Pokémon game. If it had Ekans, it'd be perfect.
Another important detail worth noting is that all the DLC for this game, which is to say the one bit of DLC we've actually gotten for this game, was entirely free, which in my mind makes it more than worthy of bonus points. Now, all of this might be enough to convince some people, but the almighty algorithm does love its collaborations, so here by mathematical demand...
What? Hey, put me back in my existential void. I was enjoying... Oh, wait. Arceus? Arceus? How was that pronounced? Anyway. Okay, so I'm not coming at this as a super fan of the series. In fact, before Legends Arceus, I had only played one Pokemon game, and that was Pokemon X. I never even completed it. I thought it was cute, I had fun petting the team and the Pokemon-a-me, but it had never really fully been my jam. I had a vague passing interest in the games up until the end of 2021 or so. So when Legends Arceus ended up kicking up dust on the horizon, I was vaguely curious, especially for talk of how it changed things up. Then Genius Boy here wouldn't shut up about it. I would constantly catch him playing the damn thing, and there was no escaping him gushing about the game whenever he wasn't actually playing the game.
First of all, that's Genius Man to you.
I'm older than you. So eventually, by default, I ended up finally giving in to peer pressure and giving it a curious look-see-doodle. And oh boy, it was literally a game changer. Gone were the endless menus and complicated balancing, gone were the limited resources, the grinding was done away with, and immediately the isekai premise had me hooked. I'm a real sucker for isekai stories. I was able to launch straight into playing in the world, and while I've heard some people complain about the extended tutorial woven into the introduction and initial story, it was very helpful for someone like me, a non-gamer girl, to get oriented in the world. And then there's the story, and oh my god, the immediate vibrant character development, and then there's the ominous threat of a tear in the sky. Hey, Logician, can I steal your mic for a while? I need to yell about this game for more than just a blurb.
As if my permission were even a factor. But yes, as you've ever so enthusiastically elaborated, Legends Arceus truly has, for the first time in 27 odd years, legitimately changed the game. The sheer number of aforementioned quality of life improvements, paired with intriguing story beat structural diversions from previous entries, and a graphically limited yet artistically endearing cel-shaded aesthetic, make for an impressive—
No, my time on the mic.
Hey!
Shh. Legends Arceus is brilliant. Brilliant! Not as in Diamond, but literally just mwah. You are reintroduced to Pokémon in the way that previous games don't do for you. Previously, you might get a basic rundown of what's going on, but most people who buy a Pokémon game already know the basics. You take a funny aminal creature and throw it at other funny aminal creatures until they beat each other senseless, and do this over and over again until you get to a big funny aminal hoarder and prove you're better at hoarding aminals, and then you get some post-game content. It's a formula, and it's one that's worked well enough since the game's inception. But you had plenty of people who recognized that the formula was getting a little stale. I think of the likes of James Stephanie Sterling, who went on record talking about what they wanted to see out of Pokémon. Or even this fucker here. I think he probably bragged about his big video talking about the one generation he can't stop sucking the dick of.
Okay, in my defense, given the migraine-inducing monotony of previous generations up to that point, can you really blame me? For a franchise with conceptual roots in Japanese bug collecting, you'd think Game Freak would have at least tried to mix things up a little after Gold, Silver, and Crystal to keep their ever-increasing consumer base invested, but, lo and behold, the formula held steadfast all the way through the Game Boy line's thematic conclusion in Gen 4, introducing the in-game world's creation mythos. Then, at long last, we finally got a bit of narrative variety in Black and White, which differed just enough from the norm to warrant several people referring to it as a thematic reboot. And I personally am inclined to agree, since at that point I feel fairly confident in asserting that most of us were so thoroughly starved for anything new that we couldn't help but obsess over these games, for better and for worse.
Right. Anything that actually adds depth to the franchise is going to stand out, and I think Legends Arceus breaks the mold the way that Black and White did, and then goes far beyond. First of all, the gameplay. Open world styled, it takes what used to be weaknesses fumbling through menus and makes them dynamic and fluid. You can, with a handful of button presses, dispatch multiple Pokemon at once to handle multiple tasks, while then cycling through your inventory to the right Pokeball for the next catch you want to make. It's a living, breathing world, active and with so much to do you can literally get lost in playing it for hours. With the crafting system, you don't have to worry as much about having enough Pokeballs to do your job as a Pokemon surveyor. Just run around, collect materials, which there are plenty of, up your stash, and then go about your business.
Which brings up the matter of what is arguably Legends Arceus' greatest mechanical strength, that being that the game legitimately incentivizes both experimentation and exploration. Your overarching goal in this game is to fulfill your role in the Galaxy Expedition Team's Survey Corps as Professor Laventon's assistant and fill out the Hisuian Pokédex. As such, you're essentially given carte blanche to capture as many Pokémon as you can, and along the way, you'll discover new means of collecting data on said Pokémon outside of simply battling them. These include feeding them in the overworld, capturing specimens of various sizes, using specific moves for or against said Pokémon, etc. Speaking of moves, another triumph of Legends Arceus' innovative inner machinations is that you're no longer required to delete any techniques from your Pokémon's moveset. You simply pick and choose which 4 moves out of the ever-growing roster of techniques your partner has accumulated over the course of the game to have in their immediate wheelhouse at any given time. any of which can be further refined to the point of mastery in Jubilife Village, meaning no more fussing over potentially losing any personal favorites by repeatedly mashing the A or B button. Same goes for evolution. It's entirely voluntary and can be manually activated at any time via the party menu whenever you feel ready for your little affront to Darwinism to metamorphose. This comes in especially handy if there's a specific branching evolution you're aiming for, but might not necessarily have all the proper criteria prepared for just yet. Battles themselves have never been more satisfying. They're faster paced, less intrusive to the natural flow of gameplay, and the strong/agile styles present just enough of a change of pace to shake things up and make things far more interesting than the previous iterations, without flooding the screen with unnecessarily elaborate transformation animations or horrendously garish redesigns conceived exclusively with additional merchandise in mind. Go home, Charizard, you're drunk. Drunk with power! Anyway, in addition to all the aforementioned overworld exploration, the game rewards your curiosity by adding data to your Pokédex for pretty much everything you do. And if you aren't awarded data, you are given experience. Even something as simple as releasing your Pokémon to collect berries in the trees or other items off the ground will fill their experience gauge. And you can even use your Pokémon to reach items that'd normally be outside of what you can access on foot. Speaking of, if you spend enough time and effort combing each map, you'll come across some rare finds and new opportunities to fill your Pokédex and add to your team. Ranging from wild Gen 4 starters to roaming high-level flying types to
Alpha Happiny.
Yes, the Alpha Pokémon. Select individuals among the native populations on each map sporting an imposing set of glowing red eyes and demonstrating superior power, size, and capability, boy howdy doesn't that sound familiar, as compared with their peers. As far as gimmicks go, Alphas are among my favorites in that they're simple in theory, and From Software-esque in execution. Imagine the Asylum Demon from the original Dark Souls, replace it with a heavily caffeinated Snorlax, and well, you get the picture. Less flashy than Mega Evolutions or Gigantamax, but just as memorable if you ask me, lending to the overall difficulty of the game in place of the artificial difficulty of near-obligatory team grinding from previous entries.
Grinding. Something in common between a lot of JRPGs and open-world games, unfortunately. Something that pads out the runtime by adding needless tasks to the pile and forcing you to do the same thing over and over. A crime that more recent games have decided to turn into a monetization opportunity by making those grind times worse and then selling you a way to skip the grind that they artificially inflated in the first place, effectively making their gameplay so bad that they make you want to pay to not play the game. It's a goddamn travesty against video games and... If you're worried about the open-world elements of Legends Arceus becoming a grind, no, let me fucking tell you. At no point do you feel that there's any empty space in what you're doing. Even the simple-seeming task of collecting materials for crafting is made complicated by one of the groundbreaking elements of the game, the thing that makes any collecting or exploring all that more challenging. The Pokémon attack you. They don't just patiently wait for you to deploy one of your team. Oh no, they will go for you. This one element of gameplay takes everything you think you know about Pokémon and blows it up in your face. There is no idling, running through tall grass in the hopes of encountering a Pokémon. No guesswork as to what Pokémon you're encountering because they're running you down and charging their lasers.
So many lasers.
The dangers in this game far outstrip anything you face in previous installments of this game series. Things are much more active, where if you don't manage to get your Pokémon partner out in time, you might get slammed by a charge attack, or a lightning strike, or a moonblast. You could be the one to faint instead of your Pokémon! Woo! This game emphasizes the danger right from the get-go. Even before you go into the field, you get several warnings that Pokémon are terrifying creatures that are mauling people, and that you're no exception. You can get into serious trouble very quickly, especially if you run into a Pokémon Alpha. Alphas are no joke in this game. I remember circling the first Alpha I encountered with every bit of anxiety, worried at getting the thing running me down. You don't just spot a giant creature in the field with glowing red eyes, which is bad enough. You get a nice little musical sting. Builds anxiety. Even just by periphery, huh? Having that suddenly start playing even before you see an alpha gives you that sense of, I've wandered into a powerful aura. You just know there's something powerful here, and to be on your guard because they can fuck you down to fainting damn quick. Oh, hey, speaking of which, the music and music design of this game is astounding. Not good, not great, but this is the most immersive a Pokémon soundtrack has ever been. In fact, more so than many video games, not just other Pokémon games.
And this should come as no surprise to veteran trainers, given that much of Arceus' soundtrack is literally composed of beautifully reimagined tracks from the Generation 4 games. Two of my personal favorites being the blood-pumping trainer battle background music and the pristinely atmospheric lake theme. Not to downplay the original pieces, mind you, even the brief musical cues indicating the changes in the day and night cycle give you some much-needed moments of respite from the near-constant pressure of narrowly escaping death by mime.
To give you an idea of how exquisite the soundtrack is, the way it's implemented, let me paint a picture. You've been running around at night, facing unique dangers and ghosts and nighttime critters that tend to get obnoxious at best, and downright overwhelming at times if you run into a patch you weren't expecting to. The horizon starts to brighten, and you watch sunlight touch the ghosts in the field, and you hear this musical sting. Then the ghosts vanish into the ground, the Zubats soar into the sky, and you feel like you can take a breath. A moment of relief, even if there are unique dangers in the daylight. The sound design in Pokémon games up until this point has been consistent and thorough. Sound effects, fanfare, chirps of jingles that tell you specific actions have happened, like taking a potion or leveling up. But Legends Arceus takes that a step further. You can still hear the iconic sounds you're familiar with, but they add new layers to scenes when you're not even realizing what you're hearing. You get a very summery tune in the coastlands, like A Day at the Beach. Or, in the Coronet Highlands, the music gets intense, which makes sense, given that the giant rift in the sky above you is looming all the more closely as you stand at the base of Mount Coronet. When I first played, I realized that this was going to be endgame territory, just by accidentally discovering the final road up to the top. And, running into an alpha that would have immediately destroyed me. Another clue that I wasn't supposed to be there yet. And the Alabaster Icelands didn't need to go that hard.
Even within the original pieces, the sheer number of musical callbacks this soundtrack provides, ranging from subtle thematic hints of iconic locales to come, to fan-favorite Oh, that's right, we should probably touch on the plot elements of this plot-driven RPG, shouldn't we?
The plot! The plot! If you know me at all, you know how much I value a good story in a video game. It's often the primary reason I pick up a game to even play. My Steam library can be easily categorized universally as story-rich. The Logician here has already ranted at great length about the engaging story of Black and White.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
And while that is an exceptionally rich story that stands out among its otherwise somewhat repetitive peers, I feel like Legends Arceus surpasses even that. And mind you, this is not to say that the others have been bad. I quite enjoyed the storyline of Pokémon X, and Legends Arceus has a lot to draw on from the Gen 4 games it's based on. I mean, heck, they introduced literal gods in the forms of Pokémon, ones that represent aspects of reality itself. Story has not been skimped on the past. It was just mostly secondary to the gameplay. But in Legends Arceus, the story is woven in with the gameplay masterfully, right down to the reason you go around capturing and observing Pokémon in the first place. You have to. It's plot-driven. You're surveying the Pokémon and building what is quite possibly the first Pokédex, both to earn your keep and to meet your higher goal, given to you by the titular entity. Seek out all Pokémon.
Yes, the first time in nearly 3 decades that the tagline, "Gotta catch 'em all," has had any real relevance.
There's yet another whole new mechanic in this game, one that comes part and parcel with a newly streamlined action-based gameplay. The Nobles. What? Nobles? But weren't they alphas? No, you fool! They are not the same! These are bigger and nastier creatures, and you don't fight them by throwing Pokémon at them. You can't. Nope, you are the combatant. And yep, you guessed it. It's because of the plot that drives the game. So, Logician, is this where we place a spoiler warning for people who haven't played the game yet?
I suppose now's as good a time as any. You see, no good narrative is quite complete without its overarching antagonist, which at first glance may appear notably absent from the game, at least compared to the far more flamboyant evil teams of previous entries a la Team Rocket, Galactic, Plasma Flare, etc. But if you're patient enough, and invest enough time and energy into completing Arceus' post-game story...
If you don't want to be spoiled, go to this timestamp to see the rest of what we have to say on the game.
It's Volo. Yeah, that guy. Great value Cynthia over here. Now, as far as motivation goes, well, long story made somewhat less long, it turns out that Volo grew up under some undisclosed yet evidently less than favorable circumstances and ended up finding new meaning for his life in God, to the point of fanaticism. Specifically, Arceus, an interpretation of God which, at this point in the history of the Hisui region, had all but been lost to time and space. And so he went on to make it his life's work, his sole mission in the Pokémon world, to seek out and meet God by striking a deal with the devil. This is no exaggeration, mind you. Volo explicitly states in-game that he somehow managed to find Giratina and have it tear open a hole in space-time by playing on Giratina's desire to exact revenge upon Arceus due to having been stripped of their position within the pantheon of creator gods and banished to the distortion world, just so that he could have the chance to meet Arceus, force them into subservience, and use their power to create an entirely new reality. Credit where credit is due, I did not expect this kind of writing to come out of a mainline Pokemon game. This, for me, makes Volo hands down the most compelling villain to come out of the franchise since N. Though, to be perfectly frank, the bar hasn't exactly been set all that high in recent years. Rose just felt to me like a less interesting version of Lysander, who himself felt like a less interesting version of Cyrus, and as far as I can tell, Cyrus is just some dude who read a few too many out-of-context Nietzsche quotes and watched Berserk a few too many times. I could go on, but I'd need a whole ass other video to list all my issues with Maxie and Archie. Gen 3 wasn't my favorite, I don't know what to tell you.
Volo. Look, I have a type, and Volo is that type. And yes, compelling is a damn good word for him. Like you said, it's not that he arrived at his bad guy status through simple greed or pride. No, if we're picking sins, his would be wrath. He had a bad lot in life. He found meaning in a higher power, but somewhere along the lines the meaning became twisted into a desire to remake things, to eliminate the pain of the world by reshaping it, claiming and using Arceus' power to do so. He has facets in common with previous antagonists in the series, obsession, wanting to end the world to save it, etc. But where he stands out is how sincere his desires are. He spends the whole game, roughly anyway, at your side, offering advice, helping you at your lowest, and even in the lead-up to the reveal that he's the central villain of the story, he's sharing what he's learned with you. He talks about what he's learned by observing the ruins and ancient texts. He hints at knowing of an additional member of the Pokemon Pantheon in a way that feels like he wants you on the same page as him. So when he turns around, ripping away the facade of a humble Ginkgo Guild merchant, grinning wildly and draws his first Pokeball to initiate combat, you hear this. And if you've been a long-standing fan of the series, you have the dread pool in your gut when you recognize just how well and truly fucked you're about to be.
Ah yes, the rated E equivalent of One-Winged Angel.
Sephiroth, my love!
Christ on a stick, you really do have a type, don't you? Anyway, the moment you hear that piano and see that Spiritomb, and the moment you stop second-guessing yourself as to whether or not it was actually a good idea to help the lingering spirit of a little girl release Spiritomb from its seal, good job buffing the bad guy hero, you probably have a decent enough idea of where things are going from here. To start, anyway. That's right, with the exception of Hisuian Arcanine in place of Melodic, you suddenly find yourself facing off against the dreaded endgame roster of none other than the Sinnoh region's very own Cynthia, one of the toughest league champions in the history of the franchise. And if that weren't bad enough, Volo's AI for this fight is smart. Really smart, further exemplifying the extent to which he has been toying with you up to this point. And just when you think it's safe to go back to Jubilife Village, wham bam thank you ma'am, Giratina makes its dramatic appearance to lend Volo its aid, not helping our comparisons to Sephiroth in the process.
The visual of Giratina's arrival is arresting in presentation. Darkness swallowing Volo, eldritch wings expanding out, briefly appearing to be his own, before this haunting nightmare of a beast emerges and surges past him. Again, if you play the Gen 4 games, his appearance might not be a surprise, but it is horrifying knowing what he's capable of.
Especially if you haven't played the Gen 4 games, because, fun fact about Giratina, it has more than one form. Both of which this sick-twisted bitch is more than happy to advertise at different stages throughout their battle with you. So, yeah, on top of facing off against a smarter-than-average trainer AI equipped with one of the most notorious teams of all time, you also have to face off against both stages of one of the most memorable legendary Pokémon ever of all time. And as many reaction compilations will show you, this caught a lot of people, even the most experienced players, off guard, to say the very least.
It's surreal to me to see those reactions myself. People going in for a fight they might have anticipated based on the lead-up to the reveal of Volo, running the gauntlet of one of the most renowned teams, with minor adjustments to fit the lore of the game, gunning it through the difficult fight against Giratina itself, only to be thrown off by the reveal of the second form. Some go all in before that point, thinking they're about to cross the finish line, only to hear that heartbeat flatlining and the true Giratina theme kick in. Go watch compilations of those reactions. Watch them die on the first hit after Giratina's origin form emerges, because they were already exhausted from Volo's team in the first round with Giratina. Experienced gamers find themselves having to rethink their strategy at that point. And now is where I humble brag that on my first go-around with Volo and Giratina, I made it through the whole thing in one go. He can confirm. He watched it happen.
And yet I still have difficulty believing it. I don't know what the f*** you fed that Gardevoir, but...
A badass Gardevoir that dodged 2 Shadow Force attacks in a row, which is impressive given that she's a psychic type, and...
Yes, as much as I'm sure you'd like to continue thanking the Academy, we still have one major plot point and confrontation to cover. The titular character and instigator of all that we've discussed.
Oh, God.
The very same. Once you defeat Volo and manage to fill out all 241 slots in the Hisuian Pokédex, or at the very least the mandatory 237, not counting specific mythical Pokémon you can only encounter if you have save files for specific Pokémon games, you're given the opportunity to do what Volo never could, by means of the Azure Flute, which some of you may remember as the infamous event-exclusive Gen 4 key item that was never officially distributed. The item which granted the player the opportunity to encounter the creator themselves, and it serves the same purpose here.
Getting there is no easy task either. Some of the Pokemon you need to track down, or evolve, are rare spawns, or have complicated evolution requirements, and the mounts you recruit don't count towards that total. You need to catch every legendary, every available evolution form of the Pokemon present in that era, and all of that is just to get God to say, "Okay, come and have a go if you think you're odd enough."
And you better hope and pray that you are, because God is ready to throw hands. All 1,000 of them.
This fight is alien. I don't mean that, casually. It's not even really hyperbole. You arrive in a starry locale surrounded by strange noises but otherwise met with silence. You turn around and spot Arceus, the same figure that pulls you through time and space, staring you down with unreadable intent. And if you don't know Arceus's theme...
The last real
That bare, disarming, fluttering noise vaguely assembled into a music arrangement, reminiscent of the theme from Jaws, will strip away your confidence in a heartbeat. You get used to the intense orchestral pieces of Palkia and Dialga, the sweeping flow of Volo's theme, the butt-clenching race of Giratina's theme, and then you get here and you're left with very little. This is a fight between you and God, and the theme only devolves the further into the fight you go.
Which only further lends itself to the feeling of being tested. This is quite literally the ultimate battle, forcing you to implement everything you've learned from your encounters with the alphas, nobles, mythicals, legendaries, and every other wild Pokémon under the sun. This is your opportunity to prove yourself worthy of Arceus' respect and blessings. And eventually, against all odds, you do. Arceus congratulates you for the blood, sweat, and tears you've shed to fulfill their request, bestowing upon you a piece of themselves so that they may walk alongside you on the world that they created. And then, they send you right the f*** back to Hisui and you never return to your original time. Get f***ing wrecked, scrub. Hope you like potato mochi and hate indoor plumbing, cause you're stuck here.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Okay, I get how that's bad, but is it really? Don't answer that. Look, there's not really an easy way to make a post-game that takes place in Hisui, where you get to run around with every god in your pockets, and then send you back wherever your character came from. Unless they programmed in a, okay, your game is over, no more Arceus for you, seeing as you only get one save file per game, so if you end the game, that's it, unless you want to erase all of your progress. At least you have built a life in Hisui. You have friends and found family there. You have your Pokémon and a lot of prestige for what you've done. So it's not actually that bad. You can get used to roughing it if that's the trade-off. Besides, there's a good chance that your character doesn't remember much from their previous life anyway, given the history of characters being shunted through time-space no longer remembering anything from their lives. Not even twin brothers with matching outfits!
I cry every time.
Speaking of crying, so I imagine the reason this is popping up as an In My Unpopular Opinion essay is because of the reception to the game on its release. There have been a lot of complaints, mostly about the graphics since this came out. And yeah, it can get janky at times, I get it. But maybe it's because I grew up in an era where ambiguous pixels were there for your imagination to fill in the gaps for, or even when an orange lion looks no different than a stack of boxes while trying to trigger the next segment of a game. I just don't see the graphics as that bad. If the trade-off for the graphics being less than up-to-date as a game that innovates and mixes up the formula, giving us something new and exciting and is planted in a rich story soaking with lore, I don't think that's a problem.
You and me both. I've also heard a fair bit of whining from Pokemon's quote-unquote competitive scene about the game's lack of multiplayer, but honestly, I've never seen competitive Pokemon as anything more than one big poorly aged joke. Far too many of these people get so aggressively butthurt over whether or not they win, or even how they win at what is categorically a children's game. Don't even get me started on professional Nuzlockers. They're just a bunch of dorks who look and act like they want to debate you on the definition of consent. But again, if any of you know anything about me, you're already well acquainted with my opinion on the slow, drawn-out death of the single-player experience in today's AAA gaming industry. So to come across such a satisfying single-player campaign from a Pokemon game of all things, well, to call it a simple breath of fresh air doesn't do it justice. And all joking aside, I actually appreciate the fact that the story to this game is left somewhat open-ended regarding the player character's fate, because it helps keep the door open for more games like this in the future. Famitsu Magazine seems to think it's a good idea too, as they gave Legends Arceus a near-perfect rating of 38 out of 40. And keep in mind, these are the same people who gave Black and White a perfect 40 out of 40. The game even earned itself the title of Nintendo Game of the Year at the Golden Joystick Awards. So while there may not be as much mechanical carryover as I would have liked, I am still pretty happy to have seen as many of the mechanics introduced in Legends Arceus translated into Scarlet and Violet as there have been.
I think there's a lot to look forward to with Scarlet and Violet. Most everyone I've seen has been totally normal about it and not obsessing over individual professors or drawing spicy fan art of them. And there's even a good reception on some of the new Pokémon, or Pokémon variants, appearing in the game. So the fact that it looks like it's integrating several gameplay elements of Legends Arceus is all the more exciting, even with a somewhat unusual gimmick for the region.
Hey, yeah. Editing logician here. So, we have both since played Scarlet and Violet, and we know, believe me, we know. Still League's better than Sword and Shield, though.
Legends Arceus is exactly what the Pokémon franchise needed. They tested out some new ideas and mechanics, they integrated plot organically with the gameplay, and it looks like it's going to have a lasting impact on how the series does things going forward. Personally, I hope they continue to play around with mechanics and continue to change up how we experience the world of Pokémon, more than just a twist on special temporary powers gained through gimmick. It's certainly what sealed me in as a fan of the series, and I know several others for whom Legends Arceus was the entryway into the series as a whole.
Could not have said it better myself. Well, I mean, I could have, but that would kinda defeat the purpose of collabing in the first place, wouldn't it?
Sure. Whatever gives you the butt pats you need to feel vindicated in your lone wolf, solitary confinement, Cheez-It-fueled, skeptic community wannabe basement.
You're gonna need some burn heal for that one.
Oh good, now they're using beat up.
Get burned!
Season 2! Season 2! Season 2! Season 2!